I could hear my father's voice cutting through the glittering chaos of the gala before I even entered the room. "Do we really have to stand next to a homeless-looking woman from New York?" he asked, loud enough for everyone in the grand hall to hear. His smile stretched unnaturally wide. My heart froze. 200 pairs of eyes shifted toward me, some curious, some amused, most judging. I froze too, gripping my borrowed heels, feeling the weight of every laugh, every whispered comment, every casual glance that dismissed me. That was the moment I knew this night would be unforgettable, not because of celebration, but because of the storm waiting to erupt. I stepped into the room of polished marble floors and towering crystal chandeliers, trying to melt into the background, the hum of conversation and clinking glasses pressing against my ears. My father, Richard Lawson, smoothed his tie as though nothing had happened, launching into stories of his latest deals, each word dripping with the pride of a man who believed he controlled every perception in the room. My stepmother, Veronica, hovered nearby, her smile fixed and delicate, perfected over years of showing presence without involvement. Ethan, my brother, caught my eye across the room. His look was icy, warning, "Stay small, stay quiet, don't make this worse." I'd seen that same expression before, at graduations, family dinners, every moment I dared to exist as myself instead of a shadow. I wasn't invisible tonight, though I tried. I was acutely aware of the juxtaposition between their world and mine. The towering Christmas tree adorned with ornaments worth more than my first month's rent. The walls lined with centuries-old oil paintings, the laughter of people whose lives had never intersected with struggle. And there I was, Clara Lawson, their embarrassment, standing in borrowed heels and a plain black coat, a ghost among triumph. Then I saw him, Thomas Whitman, CEO of Whitman Capital. The name alone carried weight, power, and almost mythical presence that made heads subtly turn as he moved through the crowd. I froze when our eyes met. He didn't glance past me, didn't need to. His gaze found me, sharp and unwavering, and in that instant, I felt seen. My father, desperate to regain composure, intercepted Thomas near the bar, hands extended in practiced desperation, a grin that failed to mask the panic beneath. Thomas shook his hand politely, nodded, and then looked right through him. His attention shifted to me, and suddenly, I wasn't the background anymore. I was the story. "Clara," he said, stepping closer, his tone calm but deliberate, "you're doing incredible work." Just the sound of my name, spoken like that, felt like acknowledgement I hadn't heard in decades. My father's face dropped, a flicker of confusion crossing his carefully composed mask. He opened his mouth, searching for words, but none came. Thomas Whitman was done listening to him. "She's your boss," Thomas added, the words slicing through the room. "Clara is the majority shareholder of Whitman Capital. It's been 3 years. I assumed you knew." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The air shifted. Conversations paused mid-laughter. Glasses stopped mid-air. And the delicate choreography of Hartford society faltered as reality recalibrated. My stepmother's composure cracked for a fraction of a second. Ethan's jaw slackened, his carefully maintained arrogance evaporating. My father, Richard Lawson, looked smaller than he had in 20 years, swallowed by a revelation he couldn't control. I stood there, letting it sink in. This wasn't a confrontation I had planned for theatrics or revenge. It was the moment my existence finally carried weight in a room that had long denied it. Every scoff, every dismissive glance, every forced smile from my past crystallized into clarity. Their opinions no longer had power over me. I had spent 7 years in New York, learning, surviving, building, growing, preparing for this very moment. Tonight wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about finally being irrevocably visible. Thomas's presence anchored me, a subtle declaration that my life, my achievements, and my choices were mine alone. For the first time in that opulent hall, I didn't shrink, I didn't apologize, I didn't flinch. I smiled quietly, letting the room absorb the truth. Clara Lawson had arrived. The girl they once dismissed as lost, unremarkable, and invisible was now a force they could neither ignore nor contain. And as the murmurs spread through the crowd, I realized something profound. This night, this shocking reversal, was just the beginning. I landed in New York with nothing but a small suitcase, a borrowed suit, and a fragile thread of determination. The city didn't care about my last name or my family history. It demanded results, and it demanded them fast, precise, and relentless. My first week at a modest investment firm in Midtown felt like stepping into a storm with no umbrella. Tasks piled up before I even had time to organize my desk. The spreadsheets, the endless reports, the calls, everything moved faster than I could breathe, and every small misstep could be fatal. It didn't take long for me to notice the patterns. Colleagues smiled and nodded as I solved problems that no one else wanted to touch. Yet when the final presentation rolled around, someone else received the credit. At first, I felt invisible, frustrated, even furious. But gradually, I learned to see invisibility not as punishment, but as opportunity. While everyone else basked in recognition, I quietly observed, memorized, and mapped the real machinery of power around me. I discovered which senior partners could be influenced, which decisions were unspoken but critical, and how information flowed in subtle, almost invisible channels. One evening, I stayed late correcting a financial model that had been miscalculated by a senior analyst. I traced every number, documented every assumption, and prepared a revised report before dawn. I expected nothing. No praise, no acknowledgement, just the quiet thrill of knowing that if the model failed, I alone could have prevented disaster. That night, I realized I was learning a language everyone else had overlooked, the language of leverage, of influence, of information as currency. It was Marcus Liang who first articulated it clearly. "Information is the most powerful thing in this room, Clara," he told me one night in his sparse office, a cup of bitter coffee in his hand. "The moment you control it, you control the game." I listened, nodding, trying not to let him see the trembling mix of fear and excitement in my chest. He wasn't talking about spreadsheets or balance sheets. He was talking about survival, about seeing what others ignored and using it without their knowledge. Victoria Caldwell was next, and she was a storm of authority in every step. She watched silently during meetings, rarely spoke, but when she did, everyone leaned forward. I learned to route corrections and insights through her first, letting her present them as her own. The recognition flowed upward, while I remained in the shadows, safe and powerful. It was painstaking, often exhausting work, but I felt the first real pulse of control in my hands. I understood that visibility could be lethal if deployed too early, yet invisibility could be a weapon if wielded wisely. Eleanor Pierce arrived later, bringing with her a ruthless elegance and decades of experience. She taught me to anticipate the unseen consequences of every action. "The board only notices the surface," she said, her voice sharp as glass. "The truth is hidden in the glances, the pauses, the emails that vanish into archives no one reads. Learn to see it before anyone else." I took meticulous notes, not on paper, but in my mind, memorizing patterns, personalities, and the subtle ways influence moved through the room. By the end of my first year, I was no longer just surviving. I was assembling the pieces of a career no one could touch, a quiet architecture of power built from overlooked details, unpaid work, and invisible victories. I was learning to trust my instincts, to make decisions independently, and to act strategically even when no one was watching. Each late night, each unseen correction, each absorbed insult became a brick in the foundation I was building for myself. I remember one evening, alone in the office after midnight, leaning against the window and staring at the glittering skyline, feeling the pulse of the city below. It was indifferent to me, and yet it belonged to me as much as it did to anyone else. In that silence, I realized something essential. My family's dismissals, my father's cruelty, the world's underestimation. They had taught me more than any guide, any mentor, any lecture. Every slight, every ignored effort had sharpened me, had forced me to notice the invisible, to act without acknowledgement, to become someone who could survive and thrive without permission. By the time I left that small firm, I was ready for the next stage, armed with insights, relationships, and a ruthless clarity about power. I had become a strategist, a silent force, capable of shaping outcomes without needing applause. I had begun transforming invisibility into mastery, frustration into fuel, and isolation into advantage. And though no one else realized it yet, my journey to the top had truly begun. By the time I had earned a measure of respect at the firm, I realized that visibility was a double-edged sword. Martin Price, a senior partner with a reputation for brilliance and charm, quickly identified me as a reliable workhorse. "Clara," he said one afternoon, leaning against my cubicle with that practiced casualness, "I need you to take the Hamilton portfolio off my plate. You're dependable." The way he said it wasn't praise. It was a declaration of ownership. I nodded, hiding the flicker of irritation. Dependable wasn't recognition, it was an obligation. Soon, my inbox became a battlefield. Every complex deal, every urgent report, every fire drill assignment seemed to land squarely on my desk. Meanwhile, Martin ensured that any credit for my work traveled upward, quietly erasing my contributions in front of the partners and clients. I stopped counting hours, stopped noticing the aching muscles in my back, and began methodically documenting everything: emails, drafts, meeting notes, and project versions. Each time I sent a corrected analysis or salvaged a presentation, I archived the evidence, knowing that someday it might be my shield. It wasn't just about survival. I began to notice the gaps the firm ignored. Small opportunities that everyone deemed insignificant caught my eye. One evening, buried in a stack of neglected proposals, I discovered a fledgling education technology startup focused on helping first-generation college students navigate scholarships and financial aid. Most partners shrugged it off as too small to matter. I didn't. I saw the potential and the story behind it. I reached out to the founder, Emily Grant, and arranged a meeting. The challenges began immediately. The startup lacked experienced staff. The founder was juggling multiple roles. Competitors with deeper pockets were aggressively entering the market. "Clara," Emily said during our first strategy session, "I don't know if we can scale fast enough. Investors want immediate results." I studied her, noting the fire in her eyes despite exhaustion. "We'll navigate this," I assured her. "We just need patience, precision, and leverage." Every decision, every adjustment, every plan was meticulously documented, modeled, and stress-tested before execution. Meanwhile, Martin continued his subtle manipulation. He assigned impossible deadlines, withheld information, and excluded me from high-level meetings where critical strategy was discussed. He smiled, charming and calculated, while I absorbed the stress in silence. I reminded myself that this wasn't personal. It was training in disguise, sharpening my ability to see the invisible levers of power and act decisively. Over the months, I guided Emily through hiring key personnel, negotiating with skeptical partners, and surviving regulatory setbacks. I worked late nights modeling projections, balancing cash flow, and preparing contingency plans. I learned that even a small misstep in a delicate startup could cascade into disaster. When a pilot program with a major university fell apart, I didn't panic. I mapped the failure, identified the root causes, and redesigned the approach. Emily executed the revised strategy flawlessly, and the company recovered, stronger than before. By the end of the first year, our investment returned modest profits. But more importantly, it proved that I could identify, nurture, and execute opportunities that others overlooked. Every success reinforced my ability to operate independently, rely on my judgment, and create tangible value outside the shadows of the firm. I was no longer just an invisible analyst. I was a strategist, a problem solver, and a builder of foundations that no one could claim. Sitting alone in my small midtown apartment one night, reviewing emails and financial models, I felt the subtle satisfaction of control. For the first time, I realized that the combination of relentless observation, quiet endurance, and strategic initiative had given me a power that wasn't dependent on anyone's approval. Martin could take credit in the office, the partners could overlook me, but the knowledge, the skills, and the tangible results I was creating were mine alone. And in that realization, I understood the first rule of power. You don't need anyone to see it as long as it exists, and exists undeniably. The invitation arrived 2 weeks before Christmas, forwarded through layers of assistants, event planners, and finally landed on my desk: the Hartford Gala. My father, Richard Lawson, was listed as the host, but this year the balance of power had quietly shifted. I held Thomas Whitman's card in my hand, a reminder that the world had changed since the last time I walked into that grand hall as the overlooked daughter. Now I was the majority shareholder and CEO of Whitman Capital, and for the first time, I could walk in knowing I owned my space. The moment I entered the ballroom, I felt every eye instinctively register the difference. The familiar scent of polished wood and expensive perfume, the gleam of chandeliers reflecting off marble floors, the low hum of polite conversation. All of it seemed charged, almost waiting for a disruption. I glanced at Catherine, who had been my partner through the labyrinth of investments, late nights, and boardroom battles. Her calm, confident presence grounded me. Together, we moved through the crowd, exchanging polite greetings, but I could see the subtle recalculation in every face that had once ignored me. Richard spotted me near the entrance, his posture stiffening. The gracious host facade cracked in the fraction of a second it took him to register my appearance. "Clara?" he said, voice tight, almost disbelieving. You actually came." His eyes darted nervously between me and Catherine, trying to fit us into his familiar mental hierarchy. "I didn't expect you to attend," he added quickly, attempting to reclaim control. I smiled, neutral, deliberate. "I wouldn't miss it," I said, letting the words hang in the air like a statement, not a justification. Ethan hovered nearby, shuffling uncomfortably in his tailored suit. "Clara, you've done well, I hear," he said, voice low, almost testing if the old dynamics still held any weight. I let my gaze meet his steadily. "I've done more than well," I replied. "I've built something independent of this room, of this family, of your expectations." The words weren't just for him. They were for every whispered doubt, every smirk, every dismissal that had accumulated over the years. The tension in the room shifted when I reached the bar, my steps deliberate. Thomas Whitman, as always, moved with that effortless authority. He shook my hand, the gesture a quiet declaration of legitimacy. No introductions were necessary. Everyone present understood, if only subconsciously, that he was the proof of what I had accomplished. Every glance toward me, every subtle shift in posture, confirmed the reversal of power. Richard attempted to interject, his voice rising slightly as he tried to reassert narrative control. These accomplishments, Clara, they're impressive, but..." I held up a hand, cutting him off without raising my voice. "I did this, not you, not your approval, not your recognition." For the first time, I watched the words land exactly as intended. The room paused, the hum of conversation fading, replaced by the silent astonishment of a family confronted with a truth they hadn't expected. No applause came from them, not in the way one might expect. Instead, there was a charged, almost physical stillness, a recognition that everything they had assumed about me for decades had been wrong. Veronica's smile faltered, the meticulous composure she maintained for years slipping into uncertainty. Ethan's jaw was tight, his habitual arrogance dissolving into disbelief. And my father, for the first time, seemed smaller than I remembered, confronted not with anger, but with the undeniable reality that the child he had dismissed had surpassed everything he had imagined possible. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I simply allowed the presence I had built over years of strategy, sacrifice, and quiet work to speak for itself. This wasn't revenge, it was freedom. I could feel the weight of all those years of invisibility lifting, replaced by a steady, unshakable confidence that I needed no validation from them. Every calculated investment, every late night, every unseen battle had led to this moment. And as I stood there, amidst the glittering chandeliers and murmuring guests, I understood fully. The true victory wasn't proving them wrong. It was knowing that their opinions, their judgment, their dismissals no longer mattered. I had claimed my space, my power, and my life. And for the first time, I was truly, unshakably free. I returned to my apartment in New York that night, the city lights glinting off the skyline, indifferent yet alive, just like me. For the first time in years, I felt a quiet, profound weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't vengeance, it was freedom. Freedom from needing anyone's approval, freedom from the relentless expectations and judgments that had haunted me since I left Hartford. I realized that all the effort, all the battles, all the nights spent invisible in the office, had never been about proving something to my family. They had been about claiming myself. I sank into the soft leather of my living room chair and let the silence settle. The noise of the city below faded into the background. I could finally see the journey I had walked, the girl who had been mocked, dismissed, and made to feel invisible, the girl who had learned to observe, calculate, and act quietly, turning every slight and setback into fuel. That girl had grown into a woman who not only survived, but controlled her destiny. The billionaire CEO sitting here was the same person, just tempered, armored, and entirely self-reliant. Daniel's message came later that evening. His voice, usually so confident and unshakable, was hesitant, almost fragile. "Can I come by?" he asked. I paused, considering. The old Clara might have recoiled, might have ignored him, but I didn't. I opened the door. When he stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was how small he looked compared to the grandeur of my life now. Not in a cruel sense, but in the way reality has a way of reframing perspective. I couldn't sleep, he said, almost whispering. I keep thinking about last night, about what you said. And you were right. I failed you, Clara. All those times I did nothing. I abandoned you when you needed me. I nodded, not with judgment, but with clarity. The past could not be undone, yet it could inform a new beginning. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I said. Not the simple kind anyway, but I am willing to try something different with you. A relationship built on reality, on honesty, not on old patterns. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes, exhausted from the upheaval of seeing everything he believed in unravel overnight. I want that possibility, he admitted quietly. And just like that, the weight between us shifted. Not resolved, not perfect, but real. The burdens of the past could exist, but they no longer defined me. I walked back to my window, looking out over Manhattan. Snow began to fall softly, drifting over the streets, covering the city in a quiet, gentle hush. I thought about the girl who first arrived in New York, terrified, carrying nothing but determination. And I thought about the woman who now stood in command of her life, who had turned invisibility into influence, frustration into strategy, and neglect into mastery. I felt a smile creep across my face. Not smug, not triumphant, but serene. This was the real gift, the peace of knowing my life was mine, that no one could diminish my accomplishments or define my worth. I had built my empire, survived the people who should have loved me best, and now I could step into the future on my own terms. And in that quiet realization, I could finally say to myself, truly, that I was free. So, to everyone listening, as the snow falls and the city moves on, I wish you a peaceful, joyous Christmas. Remember that your worth isn't defined by anyone else, and your path can always be reclaimed. If you've been inspired by my story, don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories from courageous women who are claiming their lives and writing their own destinies. From Hartford to New York, from invisibility to influence, this is what it means to take your power, your choices, and your life, and finally, to own them.